Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is dyandraadg Goesvi, uh, and I am from Second Language Acquisition Class C. And for this reading report, I would like to explain about input, intake, and output in second language acquisition. So first, I'm going to explain and describe about what is input in SLA. Input. So, input is all the language that a learner hears or reads. It's like the raw material you need to learn a language. Think of input as everything you are exposed to when you are trying to pick up a new language. Like, for example, like listening to people talk, watching a movie, reading a book, or even hearing someone speak in that language on the street. Here are more example of input. So, if you are learning Spanish and you watch a Spanish TV show or listens to someone speak in Spanish, that's it. That is input. You are hearing the language even if you don't understand everything. So that is input. How about another one? The intake. Intake. So intake is the part of the input that you actually notice and understand. It's like when you catch important words or phrases and your brain start to make sense of them. So intake happens when your brain processes some of the input and start to turn it into something useful for learning. Not all the input becomes intake because you may not catch everything. Intake is like when something sticks. Maybe you learn a new word or understand how a sentence is structured. For example of intake is okay, let's say you are watching that same Spanish TV show and they keep saying hola, hola every time they meet someone. After a few times, you realize that hola means hello. So that moment when you understand and remember it, that is intake. The last one is about output. Output is when you try to speak or write it in a new language yourself. I repeat again. Output is when you try to speak or write in a new language yourself. This is the practice part where you are using what you have learned. It's like trying to talk in the language, even if you make mistakes. The more you practice, the better you get at expressing yourself. The example of output is so if after watching the Spanish show you meet a Spanish speaker, you meet a Spanish speaker and say hola, that's output. You are using the language you have learned in real life or in social media. Even if you only know a few words or make mistakes, you are still producing the language. You are still producing the language. So how about we putting it all together? Let's imagine like you are trying to learn French. Here's how input, intake, and work together in real life. Number one is about input. You decide to watch a French cooking video on YouTube. The chef speaks in French, describing the recipe. All the French words and sentences you hear are input. Number two, intake. At first, you don't understand much, but you keep hearing the word fromage. After a while, you realize from context that fromage means cheese. This realization is intake. You have taken part of the input and learned something from it. The last one is about output. So later you are talking to a friend and you say in a French, then you say and you explain it for your friend like in French, cheese is fromage. Now you are producing the language. That is output. So intake, why are input, intake, and output are important in SLA? So for the input, why our input is so important in SLA? It because input is where learning starts. You cannot learn if you don't hear or read the language. For the intake is where your brain turns some of that input into actual learning. It is where you begin to understand and make connections. For the output is how you practice what you have learned and improve. The more you speak or write, the better you get at using the language. So by understanding these three steps like input, intake, and output, it is easier to see how language learning works. First, you need to expose yourself to the language input, then start to understand it intake, and finally practice using it output. So that's all for me. I think that's all for me. Thank you.